months to go until Oakland Mayor Sheng Thao faces a recall vote in the November election. We still don't know much about the ongoing FBI investigation following a raid at her home over the summer. In her most recent conversation with KTVU, the mayor said she still doesn't know why the FBI entered her home and collected evidence.
Attorney has been in communication with the investigators, and we are still asking those same questions around probable cause and the reason why they came into my home.
And with the election on the horizon, we're still working to find out if there is some sort of moral or ethical obligation from federal agencies to tell voters where the investigation stands, as we are just weeks away from the recall election.
Now, KTVU's James Torres is in the studio with us now with the details about those questions about whether it's fair for the mayor to have this hanging over her as she heads into an election.
Yeah, lots to unpack when trying to answer that question. And to understand this story, it's first important to understand who does what. The FBI's job, we know, is to collect evidence and turn it over to prosecutors. The U.S. Attorney's Office then decides if there is enough evidence to prosecute. We did learn if there is an election looming, these agencies are asked to be mindful about seeming partisan.
As far as we know, FBI agents are still sorting through evidence picked up from Oakland Mayor Sheng Thao's home, one of many sites looking into a possible case of corruption.
I know that I will be vindicated.
As the mayor maintains her innocence, she still learned nothing from federal investigators, including why they entered her home in the first place. Now, political experts wonder if complicating the mayor's defense against a recall election is worth being more transparent.
You do have the ability to change the outcome of an election just by intimating that there may be something wrong with the candidate, with the campaign, with their associates. And if that changes an election and then later on no charges are brought or it was just hearsay, then that's hugely damaging to a public official.
KTVU found this 2024 memo from the U.S. Attorney General's office. It offers guidance on investigations and charges happening during an election cycle, reading in part, quote, "We must be particularly sensitive to safeguarding the department's reputation for fairness, neutrality, and nonpartisanship. Simply put, partisan politics must play no role in the decisions of federal investigators or prosecutors regarding any investigations or criminal charges."
So I think that given the proximity of a recall election, that the higher ups in the Department of Justice would make a decision that any indictment would be kept under seal until after the election.
Stuart Kaplan is a former FBI special agent and now a defense attorney. He says the argument could be made that charges brought forth against a candidate do not disqualify them from running for office, much like the investigations into former President Donald Trump, who, despite felony convictions, won the Republican primary for president. However, a judge is delaying his sentencing until after the 2024 presidential election.
I'm back to work.
Another example is that of former New York Congressman Mike Grimm, convicted of fraud. Prosecutors kept his indictment under seal until after he won his re-election campaign. He ultimately stepped down, but those announcements never came from the investigators, aka the FBI. Political analyst Brian Sobel questions that.
I would say to the FBI that some amount of clarity around these situations is important for the public process. Yes, I understand you're conducting an investigation and you've got rules and you're dealing with courts and all of that. But at the same time, if something has risen to the point where you need to go into somebody's home, then I think there needs to be a little more transparency.
Any reaction to the FBI investigation?
A rare example of that transparency happened in 2016, when the FBI collected evidence on Hillary Clinton's misuse of personal emails. This was while she was the Democratic nominee for president.
This is going to be an unusual statement in at least a couple of ways.
Then FBI Director James Comey came out to announce the agency would recommend no charges to be filed to the Department of Justice. This was 4 months before the 2016 election.
I'm going to include more detail about our process than I ordinarily would, because I think the American people deserve those details in a case of intense public interest. And second, I have not coordinated this statement or reviewed it in any way with the Department of Justice or any other part of the government. They do not know what I'm about to say.
Kaplan says Comey stepped out of line with that announcement, and the FBI should not make those announcements because prosecutors could decide to go another direction with their findings. That risks confusing the public.
There are many times that the FBI collects what they believe is sufficient evidence to charge someone. With that being said, there are just as many times as the FBI goes with all of this evidence that they believe is sufficient to charge someone, and the U.S. Attorney's Office issues a declination, meaning they decide not to charge a person.
Ultimately, we won't find anything out about this investigation before the recall election, in part because of the agency's sensitivity to the upcoming election, and also because Kaplan says investigations like these can typically take up to 2 years before there are any findings. In the meantime, Mayor Thao says she'll continue her duties as mayor no matter what dark cloud comes her way.
The threshold looks like it's pretty unfair here, and that's the very frustrating part. However, we're not going to focus on stuff that we can't control. We're going to continue to do our job.
And Dave Gossett, we still continue to check in with the FBI. Even if we don't expect them to make any major announcements, they say there are still no updates to that investigation. We reached out to Thao's attorney as well, who has mentioned before that they are still waiting to see if they can meet with investigators themselves. They didn't have any comment for the story. We reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Still has no updates for us this time.
So nothing from that side. I do imagine that Mayor Thao's opponents, however, are seizing on the opportunity.
Yeah, you know, she's had some critics for some time now. That's kind of what led up to the recall election in the first place. But keep in mind, they don't know anything about this investigation either. You know, there's not like nothing's been public, nothing's been unsealed, nothing's been revealed yet. And kind of the whole point of this conversation is it's going to be that way until there is something actually there to prosecute. So once we know that, we'll let you know, but it's going to be a long time before we do.
All right, James Torres, great report. Thank you.